Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another New Year's Indie Book Blitz panel. We are here with part 2 of our fantasy romance authors today to bring in the new year. Happy New Year, you guys. How are you?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Hey, Mary.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
So glad to have everybody on with Belle back. Belle has been pretty much on every Blitz I think I've done almost. So glad to
I do
see
what
you
I
around.
can.
I'm so sorry about that. I don't know what was going on with my computer. It was like spazzing out.
Oh, it's okay. Tech stuff happens. It's a new year, so. But yeah, good to have everybody on. And if you're watching live and you would like to leave questions for any of the authors at any point, leave them in the chat. That's the reason we're doing these live. I can pull them over for the authors as we go. But before we start anything, we've got so many new faces. I'm excited. So we're going to go around. Belle, why don't you kick us off? We'll go around clockwise and you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, what kind of books you write, and what books you're known for.
Sure deal. Hi, everybody. My name's Belle Manuel. I am a fantasy author. I just released my latest novel called The Fairy Throne in November. It is a new adult romantasy with super slow burn. So be ready to not get your answers right away. I have a fully completed YA series, and I have an almost completed Assassin series that I'll be finishing up this year, and some co-author projects with an author friend of mine that we can't talk too much about it because, dates are all tentative. But yeah, just a writer and a reader and a nerd.
Yeah, and editing too, right? Or are you still editing?
I also that's my real job, is I'm an editor.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's nice to meet other author editors. And we met Belle's other half from a bookish perspective on the panel over the weekend. So
Oh yeah, Caitlin. I saw. I was watching.
No worries about. Yeah, I was like, haha, pop quiz for Belle, but no, Belle watched. So, so Mel, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about what you write?
Hi. Yeah. I'm Mel. I go by ML Eden, and I write a combination of queer urban fantasy romance, and right now I'm working on several series within a universe that is all interconnected, open world, queer centric. Current series that I'm working on, book 3 will be out hopefully in March, fingers crossed. Is called The St. George Chronicles. And then I have a vampire series, a merfolk book, and I'm also I'm working on a demon book that it'll be a polyamory knot with a lot of mystery and thievery, but it's called The Demon's Thief. That's the current work in progress. So I write a lot of fantasy romance, urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy. I do have some contemporary romance, the short stories and stuff that I've written. And this is like the beginning of my 3rd year of publishing. So I'm just looking forward to more, and hopefully we'll have the 3rd volume of the St. George Chronicles out, and then hopefully another book sometime in the summer or fall.
Sorry, my mute was taking forever to unmute. I'm like, come on, unmute. Yeah, time to lag. So a lot going on, a very exciting book series, sounds like. And it's so good to meet you for the first time. And just, I know to have 3 authors that I'm meeting for the first time today is really exciting.
Yeah.
So you're up. Hi, you're up next. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you write, what books are you known for?
That's me, right? I didn't hear the name. It kind of lagged.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Likia?
Yeah. So I am author Mary E. Zhang, and I write both clean and spicy romantic fantasy and epic fantasy. So my epic fantasy right now is I just have a little novella series. It's chronological, so you have to kind of read it in order, and just these little tiny short little episodic novellas that I do. It's got women warriors and dragons and shifters and lots of magic, that kind of fun thing. And then I have a 3-book. At the moment, there's just 3 books in it, but I have a 3-book series called The Libra Witches, and that is my romantasy series. It comes in 2 versions, clean and spicy. I wound up with 2 very opposite ends of the spectrum for my my fan base. So I decided, since that series literally you could take or leave the spice or add it in there, I decided to make 2 versions. So one version will be is on my direct site, and the other is on the retailers. So depending on how you like your romantic fantasy books, you can pick and choose based on that. And that is about witches and mortals, and they each have their own unique magic, and it goes through. Those are standalones within a series, so it goes through and picks a couple per book. And I'm taking a little bit of a break on that one, and I'm going to loop back in 2025, and then. I have 2 secret series, but you guys can have a little bit of a insider info for this one. I have a spin-off of the Libra Witches, which will be a young adult series. It'll be about the Witch Academy. So think, I guess your typical Witch Academy young adult series, and that's where we're going with that. And then I have a spicy alien witch series. That's a spinoff of that as well. So it'll be kind of futuristic fantasy with, the magic, but we're adding in sci-fi too. So that's kind of what's coming up in 2025. And, right now I'm just working on the epic fantasy ones because I got to get that out. These little tiny novellas, it took me forever to get them out though.
Yeah. And so is your young adult going to be romance too, or is that just more like a side plot?
Yes, but it will be clean. So most of my focus is always going to be on the fantasy and magic systems world building. It just depends on my mood where I go with spice or not spice, but mostly I do clean. But I do have the option for those people who like to, turn the heat up a little bit.
Love it. And Leah, it's so nice to have you on.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. This is the first time, so hello. My name is Legia. I know it's a little hard to say, but it's okay, however you want to pronounce it.
Oh,
I'm a bilingual writer. I actually reside in Mexico City, but I've been writing in English for a long time. And I am actually a debut novelist. My first novel came out in March of this year. It's a fantasy romance. It's also like I think Del Manuel mentioned, it's a slow burn. I love slow burn, enemies to lovers, you have to wait for it, but it's low spice and also a clean fantasy, because what I try to do when I write is I love to balance the fantasy and romance part. So actually my motto is, where fantasy means romance, because I want them both to be, on the same weight. So I'm very, very excited for this series. My second book is actually on the ARC hands right now. So it comes out in March of 2024. And the last book, it's already there. I'm writing it and I'm going to deliver to my publisher on next year. So very, very excited to have this. Finally, this series out, so very excited. But that's what I love to write. I have also a mainstream story. They're all shelved because right now I'm new to this publishing industry, right? So very, very excited to be there and meeting so many amazing authors out there.
Wow, it's so good to have you on, and I've got such admiration for you writing as a bilingual writer.
Oh my God, thank you. It's crazy. But you know what? It's paid off. I mean, people are responding so well to my story, and I'm so happy and so blessed to have it so well received. So yes.
Oh, well, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And hi, Luna. We've got Caitlin on. We got Luna on. We have some other people on. If you missed when I said earlier, drop your questions and thoughts in the chat. I'll pull them up if you're watching on YouTube. And all of these authors' links are in the description box too, before I forget as we go on with our discussion. But you brought up a really good point, Leah, about romance and fantasy and it makes me wonder where that line is for what is now being termed as romantasy. I saw a newer author the other day. I'm an editor for work as well, just like Belle. That's my day job. And a newer author reached out to me and was like, you guys are missing a genre. I noticed that KDP is missing a genre. It's missing romantasy. And I was like, well, it's not missing romantasy. It's just that fantasy romance is a subgenre under fantasy or subgenre under romance, depending on, which one it falls. But I'm curious to hear, for you guys, at what point does a fantasy book become officially fantasy romance as opposed to just fantasy with a romantic subplot? And what made you decide, that that's where your book was as opposed to, putting it in epic fantasy or sword and sorcery or one of the other fantasy genres?
That's an excellent question. Actually, one of the things, if I may, sorry, I think, I love Jim Butcher. I'm a huge fan of his Dresden Files, and I loved all the fantasy. But he has a small romance subplot, and as a romance reader, I love it, but I was a little bit frustrated because I wanted more. Because in that part, the fantasy takes central stage, which I don't complain. I love it, but I wanted something different. And then I went to some fantasy romance books that are very heavily rely on romance, which it's completely fine. But it was like too much on the romance, and the fantasy was like something on the outside or just like a backstage. So to me, it was very, very, very important to have them both have the same weight. Fantasy must be important to the story in fantasy romance, but also the romance. To me, it's not overpowering one or the other. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. It's all about balance. And I balance mystery, fantasy, and romance in my Libra Witch series. So I kind of like a trifecta thing there. But it is very delicate. Like you have to be really careful, like, what you're classifying yourself as when you do decide to introduce romance into it, especially because you have to figure out then where your audience is. Some people are going to expect that there is quite a lot of heat and representation of the romantic aspect, that the formula that we normally follow for romance. They're going to be expecting that as pretty prominent. But like you said, they're also in there for something that's non-human, non-contemporary, something that takes you into a different world. So I think for me, fantasy with a romantic subplot has to be, the fantasy being the driving force with, the romance kind of sprinkled in. Whereas romantic fantasy, I guess if you want to flip flop it that way and classify it, you have to really be able to feel the romance throughout the book, and understanding that, fantasy is still the driving force, but, really feeling that romantic aspect.
So I tend to play in the more urban settings with a lot of my writing. So if you've ever seen the series Lost Girl, I think that, like, I love Dresden Files, but I think Lost Girl kind of is the epitome. Well, it's what I have as a comparison TV wise, and then I read a lot of Katie Robert as well, and I feel like that's a really good contemporary romance fantasy, depending on which books you're reading of hers. But like I do feel like the fantasy is like the driver, but I also feel like the romance has to be right along with that, especially if you have like multiple partners or multiple, like, could be enemies to lovers, could be love triangle, could be polyamory situation. One of the things I really liked about Lost Girl is that it does play in that queer space quite a bit, and it isn't afraid to really show how romance can change between certain people, certain partners. So that's a really big inspiration for a lot of my writing. along with many sci-fi authors and fantasy authors that I've read over the years. But yeah, just finding that right balance of like having, you know, what I go for is like having that moment of, well, this is like a magical or a mystery thing or a science thing happening, and then there's that witty banter that hints at the romance or pushes the romance a little bit further or builds out the characters so that you can kind of see where the romance is going. So that for me is
sorry.
it's okay. That for me is you know, that fantasy romance combination. Like it's just a give and take through the whole series or book or whatever is set up. I also think a lot of mine focus on like the St. George series focus on one particular couple, but mentions several couples through the series. But it focuses on one particular couple, but it starts out like they're not together. So and I like being able to play with that and then still deliver on a happy for now or you know, happy ever after is like the rule of romance. But I think you can get away with having a little bit longer, or you know, especially if you're in a series, you can get away with having not quite landing on that happy ever after. You can leverage that happy for now a little bit more, I think. So
yeah, and I totally agree with that, which is why I loop back to that whole, you got to know what your audience is and you got to know your heat level. Because I mean, I don't write multiple partners. So and if I were to do that, then I would have to crank up the heat a lot, and I would have to crank up the romance a lot, because there's a lot more going on than just bringing like two people together. When in that kind of situation, you have to really, like, you know, layer your story, layer your plot, and then layer your romance. So I think, like, you know, just knowing your particular audience and knowing your particular writing style is really important as well in the romantic fantasy, whether it's urban or contemporary or, you know, old world, wherever it is.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you have to deliver the expectations, right? Like, for example, my fantasy, it's a slow spice. It's a clean fantasy mostly. So I am not going to advertise it's going to be steamy, because I don't want readers to be disappointed. So you have to set up the expectations with the cover, with the blurb, with the introduction, etc. Right? So they know what they're going to.
Yeah, and I agree. I feel like one of the biggest learning curves for me when dabbling in fantasy romance back in 2022 was realizing how there are those expectations. Like it has to have a happily ever after, or if it's a series, at least a happy for now, and that it can't be, you know, that the romance has to have the same amount of page time ideally as the other plot, but then you also have to have another plot. You can't just have, you know, just the romance. And so yeah, it was really interesting, and it made me realize that actually most of what I write is fantasy with romantic subplots as opposed to actual fantasy romance, because I write dark and grimdark epic fantasy, and I just have a problem giving people their happy ever afters in every book, or even a happy for now. It can be like a pretty grim ending, and then it might have a happy ending at the series, but like
But that's fine. That's fine. It's perfectly fine. As long as you set up the expectations and people don't expect that with you, that's perfectly fine.
Exactly. Right? So, yeah. So, talking about your book, and Steve, I know, Mary, you've already told us a little bit about yours, and then Belle and yeah, you've got your slow burns. But what level of chili peppers do you give your books, with one being clean, sweet kisses, close the door, to 5 being there is absolutely nothing left on off the page? This is open door 100%.
Mine are probably solid 2 to 2.5 right now. I don't foresee ever going above that, really. I just don't. There's just no point to it for me. Like, I'm obviously not against it. I like Akotar. Everybody likes Fourth Wing. It just never organically comes about. The door just always seems to shut. So, but yeah, it's like 2 to 2.5 is what my readers keep saying. But it's funny because my more conservative readers will be like, I thought it was a 3.5. Like, it wasn't. It wasn't. Like, there's like a couple of kisses, and yeah, they get a little steamy, but this is like on TV, like this 2.5. But, everybody's got their different ratings.
I do write Open Door in the Libra Witch and in the Alien Witch that's going to be coming. Those would be my 2 Open Door ones. Possibly there might be a third series somewhere hiding in there that might have it, but mostly I write clean, so meaning that nothing happens above a kiss. But like I said, I have the Open Door there too. Sorry, hold on 1 second. I have small humans. Just give me 1 second.
That's perfectly fine. we all get it, right? I think.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I have very small humans. One's 8, one's 5, and it's always mom. But anyways,
Seymour.
Yeah, I have one Open Door scene, so it doesn't, in my opinion, does not go above like a 3. So it's slow burn. I do slow burn too. So I slow burn everything. I not only slow burn like the series. Well, babe, that's why you're going. You see, I told you.
We all understand that, yeah.
The actual couples, and I slow burn the series. So, yeah, but it doesn't. I don't put more than one explicit scene in the ones that I do put in there. So it's still pretty tame for those people who are used to higher heat levels or erotica. It's definitely tame compared to those people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it all depends on perspective, right? And it depends also in consistency. I think it's very important to have consistency. In my case, I'm also like maybe 2.5. It's always fade to black. Again, I also am not against open doors. I've read all kind of stories, basically, but in romance, almost all types of heat. But then there's what you like to write. And in my case, I realized that I like having a lot of fantasy, a lot of the plot, and having also the romance plays. But when it comes to romance, I want to have the romance. I want them to feel the romance. There's nothing there's nothing better, than, to feel that romance, that attraction between the characters. I love that. But in my case, yes, the spice is not the most important thing. It's there, but then it goes fade to black. So I have scenes, but they fade to black, and there's nothing description. But because that's what I like to write, and I want to be consistent in the books that I've written, even though they're not published yet. But all the stories, yeah, they are basically the same on that same page.
So I'm going to be the outlier because I am definitely a spicy 5 chili pepper, whatever you want to use for spice consistency. Some people put it up in the habanero space. If you talk to monster romance folks, I'm like a 3 to a 4, depending on what they're reading. So I tend to definitely lean towards open door. And there's a lot of kink situations. There's your basic romance. I think queer tends to be considered more spicy than regular contemporary, just because it is a queer, it's less common. Though that is not the case with most queer books. Actually, there's a lot of queer romance and queer fantasy that is a low heat, no heat situation. So, but yeah, I tend to write a lot of high heat, a high spice, multiple partner stories. The first St. George book is very interesting because it does break some of the romance rules, because the 2 main characters are clearly with other people when they first meet, and there's a kind of opposites forbidden attraction situation going on, and so you see them with other partners through the book, which a lot of people that read romance, that would be right out, but I get away with it because it's urban fantasy. And so I call it a very hot slow burn, because you see scenes with them with other people. I don't like shy away from the fact that they're not chaste. They weren't chaste before they met, and they're clearly not chaste while they're going through this, trying to figure out what they're doing with each other. So, so I like playing with those boundaries and with the psychological aspects of it, and the relationships and different relationships. So it's, for me, it's about what that brings to the magic and the fantasy of the world and the open world, and how that works with, other species besides humans. So especially when you're writing about, I think one of the things that frustrates me sometimes with fantasy is that when we have shifters or dragons or merfolk or whatever, if they're not human, they're still very human. They still have very human cultural aspects. So I try to shift that away from what like the human centric is, so that the species actually feels like and reads like a separate species, like they have their own ideals and their own culture and their own understanding and their own biology that interacts with the rest of the world around them. So yeah, so I get really nerdy about the world building, by the way, so sorry if I go off on that, but yeah, I like writing spice. It's one of my favorite things to do besides writing like the world building and the fantasy and the characters. So
Oh, love that. Yeah, so many different levels, from, like Caitlin says, being reined in by Belle.
She's ridiculous. She's ridiculous. In an 84,000 word draft, she found a way to get 4 sex scenes in there. Now, hold on. Before you're like, that's not that bad. She wrote only half of this. So she only wrote 45,000 words of this and found a way to get 4 full-on sex scenes. And I'm like, Caitlin, where's the plot? Can't all be on my character. You can't, you gotta have it spaced out. She got it down to 3. She did good.
You're like, okay, thankfully I don't have to write any of it now, but
right, like she's like, well, what about your characters? I'm like, you can have my characters' porn scenes. You can put them in your part. That's fine. I don't care. My characters are all like, yay, and the door closes. Then hers are like, let's get out the handcuffs. I'm like, Caitlin, we have to meet on the same level. We have to be here.
Balance each other out.
Fun.
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness. So many good conversations going in the chat. And yeah, you guys are welcome to keep chatting about different things. I pulled up a couple of them as we've been going through. We did have one question from Luna about, would you say that spice is something that is integral to writing romance?
No, I don't think so, because there's plenty of YA clean romance out there where you still get the feels, right? I mean, there's Twilight has romance in it and there's no smut on the page, and that was one of the biggest selling series of all time for teens. You've got books like Scythe that have really low romance, no smut in there at all. What's another? Oh, I have so many. But yeah, I don't think you need spice. Does it enhance for like adult readers? Sure, why not? Because we have a different understanding of it, but I don't think it's necessary. I think it's just another tool, right? Like another piece of the puzzle.
And to me, for example, I totally agree with you, Belle. But also to me, it's about the emotion, right? So when you have a romance, you want to dwell into the emotion. You want to feel that emotion. You want to feel that attraction. You want to feel that attraction turns to love at some point. You know, when the characters start, you want to see that attraction building and that how they interact with each other. And then to me, it's what really matters. And I agree, the spice can be another tool, another thing, and people love it. I enjoy it. I enjoyed reading it. But it doesn't attract to me. I've seen so many books of romance that they don't have a spice, but you feel the sadness, you feel the hurt, you feel the redemption of the character who did whatever, or you just feel that love, coming to fruition, coming to life. And that to me is what really matters. And again, if there's some spice, a lot of spice, and that helps with that romance, that's perfect. But to me, it's about emotion,
Yeah, the important part about romance is finding perfect moments and then punching them hard. So if you just come right
That's
out
what she
of
said.
Right. But I'm agreeing with her. So what I'm saying though is like, if you just come out of the gate with like, with your spice, then it's not fun. So yeah, I mean, you can have it in there, but it has to be, I think it has to be relevant. And like I said many, many times, relevant to your audience too. So, I mean, I don't know. It doesn't bother me whether it's whether I read it in there or don't read it in there. I can take it or leave it if I'm a reader, and I can take it or leave it as a writer too.
Mhm.
Sure.
I like having. I get frustrated by closed door scenes, especially if you're dealing with like, I want to see how the characters interact. I feel like that's actually part of the emotional element. Like you get to that part. I also write a lot of what folks consider insta love. I do have like insta love, or that immediate, like, you'll have the spice and then develop the relationship. So it kind of goes in not in the typical romance order. Because that's life. To me, that while I'm not mirroring life exactly, I am also mirroring like what happens in, you meet somebody and maybe you spend the night with them, but then they don't become like a serious thing until much later in the story, or much later in your story or their story. It's so for me, that experience is very real, and adds that dose of reality into the fantasy as well, that it's not just everybody's like, because there is the fairy tale of like, pining away in the slow romance, and that's okay too. I just don't tend to write the slow romance, or if it's slow, it's kind of twisted to be very spicy. So in a way, but that also is how I set up what I'm doing, and what I tend to like to read. Not that I can't read low or no heat. I just finished the first book in a series that was that exactly, called Rosemary and Rue, and that great book. A lot of fantasy elements, really hardcore mystery going on, urban fantasy. Still had some mild spicy moments in there, which was great. But I like to write the spice, so I'm very much of having that on page, and everybody's got their own comfortability with that as well. So
yeah. So a lot of good opinions, a lot of good insights on it. I definitely think there's good romance books out there that don't have any spice. But again, as Caitlin said earlier, somebody else's spice could be closed door. You never know what someone's going to consider their spice. I think when I first did, as an editor, a real like adult romance anthology, not in the classroom being taught to edit, whatever else, and me being super young, I remember thinking, oh man, I need to go wash my eyeballs.
It's like mildly uncomfortable.
And then it got easier and easier.
Bad.
I didn't
just
even
like
know.
You're reading it, you're like, am I allowed to read this?
I know. I was like, oh, I feel like I'm intruding on someone's like actual bedroom here. I feel guilty.
I'm giving feedback. Like, you've used thrust a few too many times.
It's like, okay.
I tell you what, I feel your pain, Catherine. I can't tell you how many months of rent were paid with Omegaverse adult content. Just where I'm sitting here like, can we find a different word than folds this time, please? We've used it 15
Innocence
times.
Lost Editor Edition. But then it's you just get used to it. Now you're like, oh, okay, here we go.
Yeah, now I'm numb to it. I'm just like, several only means 4.
And I think what happens also in the life of a person is that you go through different stages. At some point, you want something more cuddly, something cozy. Sometimes you want the full heat. It depends. I mean, it also depends on the mood. It's very subjective. For me, reading is so subjective. And sometimes, I mean, there was a phase to me that I also love, that spicy romance, and I love that. And it comes to a point that, in my case, I kind of grew tired of it, and I changed to something else. So it depends on the mood, it depends on the person. And there are people who really who can't read a book if it doesn't have spice, and there are people who won't read a book if it has a spice. They don't feel like it, and it's okay. It's perfectly fine. And I love it that we have someone like Mel has all the spice for people who love spice, and then we have different type of level for people who don't like spice. So that's perfect. I think that's we're not in just one niche with one type of people. I mean, there are a lot of people who see romance in a different way. They feel it in a different way. So that's why, bringing back to where we started, it depends on expectations. So someone say, oh, I want to read a book that has all the spice, all the twists, and they find something that it's closer, they're going to be frustrated. And the other way around, oh, you know what, I like some romance, I just don't want you to give me more details, and they might cringe when they see it. So it's all about, I mean, that's all about expectation, and I think it's very important for us as authors to keep the reader the expectation and keep that promise throughout the book or the series.
Exactly.
And see, expectations on what romantasy is, because that's the problem with romantasy, is it's all encompassing of fantasy romance and romantic fantasy, which are slightly different genres, right?
Exactly.
And it's just like Star Wars isn't a sci-fi, it's a fantasy in space, but everyone's going to call it a sci-fi. It still ranks on top sci-fi lists all the time, but everyone describes it. It's fantasy in space. So it's a space fantasy, if you will, a space opera almost. But that's why I try not to use romantasy in my marketing, because my books are much more dark fantasy with romance as that's the high note, is that, hey, someone also loves you in this world of evil. like my Assassin series, they have fated mates, they have all of that, because that is the positivity as the assassin is like learning, like, dude, the world is just terrible. Like, it doesn't get any better. Every time they close down one bad guy, 10 more pop up. It's very much reminiscent of our world, right? Like, you hear of one criminal goes to prison, and then there's 10 more documentaries that are exactly like that guy. And you're like, oh, it doesn't get better, right? Whereas my new series, The Fairy Throne, it is a lot of political intrigue in a fairy environment, very much like what you said, Mal, about the different species having different views on things. While I played with that in my Assassin series, they have slightly different variations, like different cultural barriers. But in the Fairy Throne, the fairies are completely different to humans. They don't see things the same way. They just don't. And it's not a matter of, oh, I like this relationship style, you don't. It's full on culture barriers. You know, fairies like their sex parties and their whole like, hey, flavor of the week kind of mode. And then humans are usually like, okay, but like, let's settle down and have kids, because we only live for like 60 years. So we gotta, so it gets to play with that and see the different opinions on how they view the world. And like, since humans are dying anyway, they don't really care. Like, oh, well, you don't live very long, so what does it matter? And you have this human who's like, okay, but it matters. Like, even though we're going to die before you guys, like, maybe you should be nice to us. So I think that's why I try not to say romantasy, because it's much more dark fantasy with those little hopeful moments of romance being the happiness. So I don't think any of my characters get a happily ever after so much as a happy maybe for now. So we'll see.
And that's a very, very good point, what you mentioned about and that's what Mel said before, and now you, regarding, it's very frustrating to see sometimes, different species acting exactly like humans. You don't want that. It was like, then what's the point? What's the point to give them fur, give them fangs, whatever? Have them, they have a different perspective, right? If they've been here roaming on Earth for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, then their perspective should be quite different. As you say, the parties, they don't care because, they don't have the hurry. So that's what I think makes the history interesting, having those kind of little differences on perspectives on the different, if you're going to have a fantasy with, usually you have with different type of species, then have them, have some behavior, some morals, some kind of point of view. They have to be different from what you're expecting, because that makes it interesting. Say, oh, okay, so that's how the Fae act. That's how the alien act. How they, in my case, have immortal pirates act. So it's fun, and I think as a writer, it's a lot of fun to put ourselves in the foot of someone on the shoe, of someone who's so different from a human, right? Or who has different things. that's something that I really relish on. I enjoy it because you can play the part of someone so different from what you expect. Right.
Yeah. Love that. So I know we're really pushing close on time. We got about a minute per person, though, to go around and talk about what is coming up for everybody for 2024. New events, new books, new other stuff. Mary, why don't you take it away?
I will be finishing up my novella series for my epic fantasy. The first in series is called Queen of Light and Ashes, which is free on all retailers except for Amazon. But for those of you who follow me on Instagram and Facebook, during the launch of the third installment, which should be this month or beginning of next month, I will be offering a book funnel link for all of the Kindle people. So, you can still get it if you are a Kindle user, but it's available everywhere else if you are so inclined to check it out today. So that's going to be finishing up in January, February, no later than March. And then somewhere around August, I will be writing a little prequel novella for my Libra Witch series. And then basically this year is like my plotting year because my health is really going down. So I'm trying to kind of balance my work life, situation right now. But that's really what's going on. I will be doing one signing event, Dreaming Dirty in Maryland in May of 2024. So if anybody is there, I will see you, and I'll be bringing my spicy witches with me. And that's pretty much it. And, just plotting and getting 2025, prepared with some pretty big reveals and some pretty big books.
Yay!
Yeah, that's it. That's all I got.
That's a lot.
I don't want to
all I got. That's a lot. Like, I'm trying just to finish.
Yeah. No, I tend to really pull out the stoppers when it comes to publishing. I did 3 books last year, so 3 full-length novels. But this year, for what I consider a break, is 3 tiny little novellas.
Yeah, I'm trying to just get 1 book out this year, so that's a big goal. I mean, if you're not careful, you can end up burning yourself out, which is one of the things that, I've been an editor a really long time, but I didn't start publishing my own books until 2021 is when my first one came out. And then I hit it hard, and I didn't let up till after the Realm of Darkness set came out and we hit the USA Today bestseller list. And then I was tired. I had no idea how draining it was. So you've got to take care of yourself too, or you won't have the energy to be able to continue it long term. So now I'm just trying to find that balance. So yeah. But how about you, Belle? What's 2024 look like for you? And
so
Caitlin.
For 2024. So Caitlin and I are hoping to release one of our co-author books. We're both doing what Angelina and I did on my other co-author, where we have a bit of a catalog backed up so that we don't have to stress about writing another book while we're working on our other projects. So we're hoping to at least have one of them out in 2024, but that's why we just say sometime in the year, we might just release them all on one day. Who knows? But I have my Soul Stealer saga coming to an end this summer in 2024. I am aiming to do it on June 5th, like I've done with all the other books, because you know how I like organization in the same dates. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Her story got condensed from 5 books to 4. And then The Fairy Throne book 2 will be coming out. And then mine and Angelina Steffert's book will also be coming out in September of this year, the second book to our one that we released last year. And that's it. Yeah. More stories in the same universes as always. I've got 3 universes within which I write. So
yay. Yeah. And as I said earlier, Mary, I don't know if you were on, and I was like, we had Caitlin on last week, and I told her it was going to be like pop quiz, and then Belle showed up on the live, so Belle knew exactly what Caitlin said on the last live. Caitlin, if you're watching, well played. So, how about you, Lehia? What do you have going on for 2024?
Well, I'm very, very excited. As I mentioned, my first book came out. It's on KU. And the second book, it's the trilogy, is coming out on March. And I'm writing the third book. Well, I'm actually already written, but as you know, it has to go through several rounds of layers before I actually gave it to my editor. So I'm a layer writer. I like, to keep building things up. So I'm working on that third book, and they're all going to be on KU for the moment. And also, well, one of my books, the first one, is going to be published in Spanish. So I'm actually also translating that first book into Spanish. So that's very exciting for me. And also now that I'm going to finally finish this trilogy, I want to start working on books that I've been reading before, and I've been waiting for them to be edited correctly. So that's what I'm going to do. And if you are so inclined, also in my webpage, if you subscribe to my newsletter, I have 2 short stories for free in this universe. It's like the prequel. So that's all exciting. I have several short stories that I wish to also keep working on. It's a very exciting year.
And all of that doing bilingual too. So do you put out like a English and a Spanish version, or?
Right now, I was not thinking of that because I'm with a small publisher in Texas. Actually, I'm going to the Fan Expo in Dallas. I did it last year, and I'm going this year, and it's so exciting. And I hope to meet the fans there. And I started in English everything, but I had the opportunity to send my manuscript last year. Now I can say last year to one of Mexico's publishing houses, and they accepted, and I'm so excited about that. But I do write in English, so now I'm translating my own work to Spanish, and it's so weird for me to see them in Spanish. But it's also, now that I'm doing that, it's also so interesting to see how they sound in my own words in Spanish. So that's pretty curious. So, but yeah, a lot of work, all the time writing. We're not just waiting for one book. We're just trying to do more and more books. But as you say, Katherine, balance is important. I keep trying to remember, because you get overwhelmed with so many things in the publishing world, and you can't do all the things. And so it's like, take a deep breath and do one step by step, and have that balance with your own life, because that's also very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you, Mel? 2024?
Well, 2024, I am hoping to release the 3rd volume of the St. George Chronicles, called The Dragon's Egg. So we've had the Dragon's Saint, the Dragon's Lance, and now the Dragon's Egg. So you might guess where that's going. I just released a book of short stories in the same universe. I write in a universe called the Mythical Desires universe. It's an open world, magic, science, myth, legends, queer centric. And so I'll be continuing that, and all the series are kind of bound up in that. I have multiple series, but the work in progress I'm working on right now is a demon, angel, dragon, and a thief. So it'll be a polyamory story with a lot of mystery and fantasy and internal conflict between interesting character dynamics as well. And it's coming along pretty well. I'm hoping to maybe get that book out this year or next year. Also looking at the second in the Vampire Accord series, which I've started, but it needs to go through editing. And that will be hopefully this year or next year. But I only have one planned thus far that should come out this year. And then I will be at the Smut Lovers Conference in August. I think it's August. Yeah. And I'll be a signing author at that conference. So.
Yay! Loving all the author events on the panels this year. This is really exciting. It's a good year to be indie. Yes. And then for mine, I know I have not shared this on any of my other panels, but I did start Splitting Dawn, which is the book that was in the Realm of Darkness set, and those were all full-length novels. But I had 5 novellas in this series, and then Splitting Dawn. And one of my 2 goals for this year is to finish this. There's only 1 book left in this series, so my hope is to get that out this year and give the readers a finished series. But that would end my fantasy romance. I think 100% move me straight into my dark, epic, mythological gloom and dooms. But yeah, so it's been so good having you guys all on. Happy New Year. I wish you all the best in 2024. This has been a great live.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you, and thank you for inviting us. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for watching. If you would like to learn more about these authors or check out their books, go to the description box. You can get the links there if you're watching on YouTube. And come back later this week. We'll be adding more panels through this week and into next week to finish out our New Year's Blitz. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.